Architectural Foundation is so pleased to be sponsoring DIG this year. It just seems like a great fit. IAF is in its 31st year of promoting architecture and design through educational programming and events. We believe that excellence in architecture and urban planning translates into a higher quality of life for Iowans. It is in this spirit that we'll soon be announcing the winners of our statewide Community Enhancement Through Architecture Awards. Be sure to watch for an announcement for our virtual and visual presentation. In addition to our awards, our architectural tours, programs, and classes bolster our participants' appreciation of the value of good design. Yes, they also bring recognition to particular architects or buildings, but more importantly, they build reputation for Des Moines as a city. With the exception of 2020, we've conducted numerous motor coach and walking tours of Des Moines' world-class architecture. Examples would be the tours we gave to international attendees of the World Food Prize and our tours for the International PEO Convention. In addition, we offer programs for students, and we're making every effort to broaden our tent to share the joy and understanding of architecture with underserved communities. In June, we hosted a virtual event celebrating the renovation of the Edna Griffin Building and its remarkable story. I love the Edna Griffin project because it is not just a great building, but it includes the stories, history, lessons, and romance that make it have such an impact. It's just one example of how architecture can build our city's brand, increase tourism, and define our identity. After all, for a city, architecture is the clothes it wears to a job interview. Let's make the most of our architectural history and our assets. Please consider supporting our small foundation and help us share Des Moines and Iowa's impressive architectural portfolio. I'm going to put a few links in the chat, including our Everyone is Served celebration of the Edna Griffin Building reopening, our 2019 annual report, our website, and a link to the recent Business Publications Culture podcast that we did. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia. Before we get to our panelists and start to talk about the history of the building and Roxanne and Andrew's piece today, I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer and Jeff Magner to thank our sponsors and talk a little bit about the DIG program more generally. So Jennifer, would you like to say a few words?
I'd love to start off. Thank you, Joe. As Joe mentioned, the DIG series is sponsored each year. We have a number of sponsors who are helping us. If you look behind both Joe and me, we have the banners, and Sheila as well, to keep you reminded of our sponsors throughout. Please thank them when you see them. The presenting sponsor of the DIG series is Terracon, and our gold sponsors, you've met Claudia from the Iowa Architectural Foundation. We also have Mid-American Energy, the City of Des Moines Office of Economic Development, RIPMA Properties. We also have supporting sponsors. The supporting sponsors include Confluence Inc., Tri-City Electric, Epic Studio, American Marking, Hanson Company, Newman Brothers. And each month we have a hospitality sponsor. Now, when we're meeting in person, the hospitality sponsor is that one to greet you at the door, to give you a handshake and make you feel welcome. Today it's virtual, that's not an opportunity, but also our August hospitality sponsor is MediaCom Business. As you can imagine, with all the damage that happened last week, they're a bit overwhelmed right now, but I want to make sure that you know that they're available, they're working around the clock, and they're here still to help you with your needs. I'll put contact information for our MediaCom Business representative in the chat as well for you today. And Jeff, did you want to say a few words?
Sure, appreciate it, Jennifer. Again, Terracon as the presenting sponsor, very pleased to support this Downtown Chamber organization. We have a number of our clients that are engaged in the downtown development community. This project that we're going to see today is just another outstanding piece of work where we're going to get to hear a little bit more about behind the scenes and how it came about. One of the services that Terracon provides is we help our clients understand what's hidden behind the walls and things in buildings, finding hazardous materials and things, and is very pleased to be part of this project early on. So very excited to see what's coming coming here, and also pleased to support this organization and the DIG downtown group. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jennifer. So with that, we'll initiate our program by way of introduction. If Roxanne Conlon is on the call with us today, would like to just unmute herself and tell us a little bit about herself and her involvement with the project itself.
Thank you. I'm unmuted now. Can you all hear me? Okay, good, good. Claudia sent me a background to use in the Zoom, and I suggested that would not be possible. I'm not technologically gifted, but like all of you, I've been on 1,000 Zoom meetings over the last several months when it's not possible to go out, not possible to meet in person, and I found them less satisfying than in-person meetings, but certainly a good way to get together and do things that we need to do. I named the building after Edna Griffin, even though I had known Edna since sometime in the late 60s. I did not know her story until in the 90s. I marched with her for civil rights. I marched with her against the war in Vietnam. I marched with her for women's rights. We made a lot of trouble together. And she was just a wonderful, good friend. She never talked about the case that she brought against the Katz Drugstore. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it in case you don't know. When Edna was a young woman, she brought her baby into the Katz Drugstore, which occupied the lower level of the what was then known as the Flynn Building. And she went to the counter, and she was refused service. She did not take it lightly. If you knew Edna, you would realize how unlikely it would be that she would take it lightly. She organized marches, and she sued Mr. Katz and took the case all the way to the Iowa Supreme Court and won. And some years thereafter, not very many years thereafter, when I was 14 years old, I went to work. My first job was at Katz Drugstore downtown, 35 cents an hour as a waitress at that very counter. No one told me about Edna Griffin. No one told me about the historic role that she had played in opening public accommodations to all African Americans in the state of Iowa. I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was not a great place to work, and Mr. Katz was not a very nice person, but I worked there anyway. I worked there for probably several months, and I did notice that there were African Americans who came to the counter and were always served. And I think that in the 50s, in the late 50s, that was less common than you might think. So then I went on to become active in politics and active in civil rights, and she became my friend. In 1972, the two of us supported Shirley Chisholm for President of the United States. Do any of you know who she is? She was an African-American congresswoman from the Bronx, New York, and decided 1972 was the year that an African-American woman should run for the presidency. And I thought she was right. And so Edna Griffin and I organized a campaign for her. We sent 4 delegates to the Democratic National Convention in 1972, committed to Shirley Chisholm. It was the most delegates that she had from any state, including New York. We didn't expect that she would win, but the statement that she made was an important statement, I think. As time went on, my daughter was appointed to the historical committee that studied the issue of Edna Griffin and what she had done. And keep in mind, she did it 6 years before Rosa Parks sat down in the front of the bus. And she was, I think, as important a civil rights leader as Rosa Parks was. She really broke a lot of barriers. And I am proud to have known her, proud to have worked with her, and proud to have named the building after her. That came about because my daughter Debbie told me what she had done as a result of her being on the commission that studied these issues. So one night, in the middle of the night, I woke up and woke my husband up, and I said, we have to name the building after Edna. We owned it at the time. And of course, he wanted to go back to sleep. So he said, fine, go right ahead. And I did name the building after her. She was still living. She was present at the time. And I was delighted to be able to name the building that she couldn't get served in after her. It seemed to me like the closing of the circle. It seemed to me as though it was a very worthy thing for her to have done. And to name the building after her seemed to me like the right thing to do. Since that happened, I had my office in the building for many, many years, about 17 or 18 years. And then we sold the building to these wonderful people who wanted to make affordable housing units in it, and who wanted to honor the legacy of Edna Griffin. I'm so glad that we picked the right owners. I'm so glad. I'm so delighted with what they have done with the building. I think it is. It makes it even more of a landmark and even more important in terms of the history of Des Moines and the state of Iowa. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words at this auspicious occasion.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing that story. That was wonderful. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn the program over to Andrew, who is going to talk a little bit about the work that RDG did, the work that he's done, and sort of the working relationship they have with Ritma Properties and Tim. So with that, Andrew, I believe I've given you ability to share your screen and all that good stuff. I can help you as well. So you can use whatever technology is available to you at this point. So, but please take it away.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Andy Lorenzen. I'm an architect with RDG Planning and Design, and we were the architects for the Edna Griffin Building. We started working on it in 2016, right after Roxanne and her husband sold the building. There was one owner between the Conlons and Tim and his group. It was Revive Community Investors. They are a group out of the Quad Cities who bought the Midland Building and the Griffin Building at about the same time. And they are a consortium of construction companies from the Quad Cities that were looking to make a move into Des Moines. And so they picked some pretty splashy addresses and bought those buildings, and then hired us, got going on the project, and then eventually had a change of heart and ended up selling the buildings. They were on the market for a while. Tim, his partners, and their investors purchased it and really did the heavy lifting at that point. But that's kind of how it went from Roxanne through to the present day. But I've prepared some slides, and it will help to probably illustrate kind of my experiences, our experiences throughout, and I'd ask for questions at any time, because this is going to be probably a little bit stream of consciousness type stuff. So let me see here. The building was first constructed in 1885 by Martin Flynn. As Roxanne mentioned, it was called the Flynn Building. Martin Flynn was a pretty famous person and important person at the time. His house is actually the house that is still preserved up at Living History Farms. He was a road builder, Irish immigrant, and he first built the building in 1885. It was a dry goods wholesale store with offices above, and then he started a bank called the People's Bank, put the bank in the building, and then did a major renovation in addition to the building in 1906, where he took off the tops of the 3 stories and then added 4 more, creating a 6-story building, and did extensive renovations to the first floor. That was in 1906. In 1929, 1930, the Great Depression occurred and the bank collapsed, and thereafter Katz Drugs came in. They were a Kansas City discount drugstore, and they moved in. This was their first Des Moines store, and this is what it looked like. As you note how busy downtown Des Moines was at the time, and how lively the storefront was, and the amount of signage. The building changed an awful lot when it became such a heavy kind of retail use. As Roxanne said, in 1948, which is 3 years after the date of this picture, Edna Griffin was refused service at the counter in the store and led the protests outside the building, and sued the drugstore. And the ultimate result of that was the end of the Jim Crow discriminatory practices that were prevalent throughout Iowa, even in the 1940s. It's a picture of Edna Griffin here, and then some of her comrades during the picket lines. And it stayed Katz for a long time, and then in the 80s, someone considered a renovation of the building, and you can see that they thought about some different options. Is after the hub tower was built, so that kind of dates this idea.
Hey, Andy.
Yes, sir.
Would you mind zooming in just a smidge? There's that gray board. There you go. Perfect. Thank you so much.
So this is what the building looked like 3 or 4 years ago when we started investigating it and thinking about its adaptive reuse to be used as apartment buildings. It had always been retail on the first floor, and then 5 floors of offices ever since 1906. When we put together our proposal for Revive Community Investors, this is what we kind of sketched up. We imagined a restoration of the building and lights coming out of it, it becoming more of a lively place. And then as we worked through the design and thought about how to make all that happen, we enhanced our rendering with the aid of some people that are technically proficient, and got into the design. And then this is the first floor. These are kind of finished products, but the first floor of the building, this is where the come and go is. So this became a big storefront retail space. This is also where the Katz Drugstore was back in the day. And then two other ground floor retail spaces. So this is going to be a physical therapist office. They're building it out now. And then this is already a photographer. He moved here from New York and couldn't believe how great of a space he could get in an old building for the rents that we have in Des Moines. This is the main lobby of the building, and it is how residents of the apartments can access the elevator and the stairs, and the mail room is off to the side here. Come and go. These are public restrooms, so their customers have access as well as these folks, and this is how you access the back alley. These are after shots of the restoration, and if you just for reference, this is a picture of kind of the way it looked in 2016. So the big move on the storefront was to uncover, to remove the layer of ephes that had been applied, and we were excited to discover that there was quite a bit more height than what had been shown. So we were able to, the big move on the first floor was to open those openings back up to their historic proportions, make them a little bit more inviting for retail, make the building feel a little bit more open and grounded. But a challenge during construction was that we just didn't know what was there. You saw from sort of the historic photos and the drawings that there had been several different iterations of the building. We didn't know which one we were going to find, and as it turned out, we found really some of all and then a lot of nothing. So we had to kind of start from scratch there, but we had to do it during construction. On the west side of the building, this will be the physical therapist's office. So we recreated we just used a historic configuration for the storefront to get all the light in as far as we can. But we did it using contemporary material and contemporary storefront system. And this is the main entrance to the building. We had hoped for a long time to be able to make this quite a bit taller. But when they started doing the demolition in this area, Mike Millen, who was the superintendent with Newman Brothers, called me up and said, "Hey, we found a steel beam. It's right about here." And I said, "Well, did you call the structural engineer?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "If we take it out, he doesn't know what'll happen." So we left it because there's 6 stories above it. So we thought it'd be good practice to leave that. And that's really kind of how we made a lot of decisions during construction. These buildings are called adaptive reuse, and the adaptation and adaptability is a really important characteristic for the team to have, because it's just a continual process of uncovering unknowns and dealing with them in order to try to get to that finish line. This is a picture inside the Come and Go space, which we didn't design this. Come and Go has their own architects, but we helped out with some of the coordination, and I really think it turned out great. And I love also, in the same way that Roxanne talked about renaming the building after Edna Griffin, she thought that sort of closed a loop. I think that having this be another type of public drugstore or convenience store space with seating also closes a type of loop. I think it says something about the health of downtown Des Moines that it can support this type of retail store again, and I think it bodes well for us going forward. The second floor of the building is connected to the skywalk on the south. It crosses that alley, and then the hub tower is here. So Tim's group wanted to keep this as an office, potential office user, and there's been some interest in it as a co-working space, minority-owned co-working space, which would be fantastic. Also another sort of poetic type of loop closing. For now, it's still vacant. It hasn't been spoken for. We're in kind of conceptual planning for that. The space has got tall windows and tall ceilings, about 12 feet, original openings that were concealed but have been uncovered. A lot of the glass was able to be retained and replaced where it wasn't. And right now it's just this big open bright space that we're hoping to be able to put a great user in. And then the picture on the right is a typical restored corridor. So throughout the demolition process, we discovered the Greek key pattern in the tile, and we'd hoped to be able to reuse it, but we discovered, Terracon can probably talk about this a little bit, that there is asbestos everywhere, including impregnated into the original hallway tile. The mastic, the tar, had asbestos, and it had penetrated the surface of those tiles, and there was no way to remove it. So we were unable to reuse that material, which was disappointing, but we were able to replicate it pretty closely using contemporary tile. Floors 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all identical floors. That's where the apartments are. So there's 9 units per floor. These dark gray units on the north are 2 bedrooms. And there's pretty good sized 1 bedrooms at the corners. And then back here, the building always had a light court, and the light court had big windows, but in the 1970s, there was a second means of egress added here, which concealed the windows that went here. So we weren't able to utilize that in the same way. So these are sort of long, narrow units that look out to the north, whereas this one looks out over that light court. And it's a very urban feeling building because from every direction and every window, you've got just a big cityscape where you're seeing over some roofs and you're below a lot of tall buildings. And it's really a pretty exciting view shed in all directions. With historic preservation, adaptive reuse, we're always looking for opportunities to leverage those pieces of the building that we find or that have been preserved and still exist and that are cool. And one of them was the original stair in the building. It's this beautiful wrought iron, cast iron assemblage. It's got marble treads, and then it's got these sort of filigreed stair risers. They were covered by plates, metal plates, and so we didn't know they were there. It took us a while to figure it out. But then once they're removed, you see that what they were doing is they were just allowing that filtered light through the courtyard to pass through these stairs, and it really makes a pretty kind of, it's really a beautiful type of ephemeral light that passes through it. It's a nice feature. In a building like this that was basically occupied and heavily used for its entire life, you're really sometimes limited to the historic features that are left. So it's important to try to identify them and make the most of them if you can. This is also an interesting shot because this is new tile that we added back to the corridors, and then at the landings we were able to preserve the original. So it's neat because you've got both that you can see. This is a typical apartment. This is a corner unit in the southwest corner of the building. It's a 1-bedroom, and it's typical in that we really didn't try to do too much with these. We organize these things based on the geometry of the building. And one thing we always did inside the units was to never touch the exterior wall with one of our new walls. We tried to divide the space using kind of minimal partitions in order to, and the reason for that is that we wanted to be able to share the windows and share the light. So if you're sitting in your living room here, you've got light and views through every window in your apartment. And then the kitchens are also basic and functional kitchens. They have a real decent granite top on them and good basic cabinetry. And the layout is always, you can always make food in these, although we don't expect people to do a ton of cooking living in the middle of downtown. They're certainly functional and useful kitchens for people that do choose to use them. We had challenges in the building. One of the challenges is fire resistance and life safety. And so you see a lot of exposed conduit in this building, as you do in a lot of historic preservation, adaptive reuse projects. But the reason here is really about preserving that fire resistance rating of that floor, of the historic archaic floor ceiling assembly as best we could with as few penetrations as we could. That helped us a lot to be able to say we were doing that kind of as we were working through our code compliance issues with the city of Des Moines. This picture is illustrative of that discovery process even during construction. We weren't able to do as much demolition, selective demolition during design as we would have liked. We almost never are. So you have to be prepared to adapt the final product to those conditions that we discovered. And here you're looking at new or relatively new masonry, existing masonry. And then this is where the signage band would have been in the Katz era. And so you just see an amalgamation of building materials from different renovations. And we struggled for months to try to come up with a logic for that, to organize it. And ultimately we did, but there was many days when you could have drove by and seen, half a dozen people stand outside pondering it. What do we do here? This is a selective demolition early where we just cut pieces and things to try to find out what assemblies were left and what we were working with to try to make plans and work with SHPO to propose solutions. This is just a shot of that tile again. New doll tile. The factory worked with us to try to replicate that, and this was their first draft, and then we made marks on it and sent it back. I talked a little about life safety, but one of the big, so to boil down the big life safety issue in the Griffin Building, it's a little bit taller than it's supposed to be for the type of construction that it is, if you're looking at it from a modern code standpoint. And so we had to accommodate, we had to make up for that by taking that original historic stair that we wanted to feature as a historic element that we were going to restore. We had to wrap that and turn it into a 1 hour protected shaft. And one way that you can do that is to actually cut it free of the building and enclose it, basically uncouple it from everything around it. But of course that sounds ridiculous, and it is. So we didn't do that, but what we had to do was work with an outside third-party fire protection engineer. And I learned about something called an engineering judgment, which is what you have to get when you're proposing life safety, fire resistance solutions that don't yet exist. You have to get someone who the city believes is knowledgeable enough to make that kind of judgment call. So we were able to come up with the detailing that was required to do that, but it required an intensive level of investigation and an iterative approach to detailing that was new to me, and was a little frustrating, but really resulted in, I think, a very safe condition there. We also had to go very in depth with original and existing conditions with the windows. For those of you who are familiar with historic preservation tax credit projects, you know that windows are very often critical to the design and subject to a high level of scrutiny from the SHPO and National Park Service reviewers. So we really got in there and removed all everything back down to the original bits and pieces and tried to puzzle out how those original windows would have looked, basically from scars in the wood. And ended up coming up with this type of drawing where we got back to original pieces that were still there and interpolated pieces that weren't there, and then compared those to the proposed replacement windows to be able to say that our sight lines were going to match and the window sizes were going to be appropriate, and the width between the double hung windows was going to be historically appropriate. And that required quite a lot of work with SHPO. And then also Marvin Windows was able to, play ball and make sure that this piece of wood right here was going to be the right width so that the windows looked the way they needed to look. Pretty intensive process, took a while, a lot of back and forth, but ultimately resulted in windows that were correct for the building. And then another thing that we had to do, as you strip off bits and pieces, you start to have to puzzle out the way the pieces work. And this is the way the elevator room works. It's kind of essentially suspended from the roof in a way. And we didn't know any of this. And then we had to pay attention to it because we discovered during demolition that it had been burned at some point. And so a lot of the wood had been, a lot of the thickness of the wood was lost due to charring. And then we had to just sandblast it off to see if the wood was still good and whether we had to reinforce it, which we did. But then as we're sitting up there, this is the type of drawing we were making on the walls of the building to try to figure out what we were looking at. We also, this was new to me, but we kept the historic original fire escape as a means of egress. And you can see from this picture that it was in need of some restoration. It wasn't safe. So we did a structural engineering study of it and then put together documents to fix it. And with the correct inspections, we were able to keep it as a means of egress, provide access to it. And so it is a working life safety device. It can save your life if there's a fire, and the windows all work to get to it. So that was an interesting and kind of a learning experience for me. And that's the finished product. It's a really good looking building in downtown Des Moines, occupying a piece of prime real estate, and it makes me happy. It's back in service. I love coming down to the Come and Go. I think Come and Go actually has delicious coffee, and there's always people in there, and I think it's a win. It was a tough project, but it was a labor of love. And at the end of it, we all stayed friends. Tim was great to work with. His partners, Jeremy and Paul, were there all the time. And then, of course, Newman Brothers team. Mike Millen was the superintendent, and Rick Trower was the project manager for it. And Newman Brothers was just absolutely awesome to work with. You know, there was really no circumstance that occurred that they were unprepared for, and it was just a really great experience all the way through for me, and I think for everybody. And I would be happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Andy. Maybe as folks are thinking about questions, I could just start with a seed question, and then folks can kind of jump into the chat or on mic as you're kind of doing that. So one of the questions we had prepared for today was, what was one of the greatest challenges the design team faced in making upgrades to the building?
Well, I'd say the unknowns. We went into construction with still a lot of unknowns, just in terms of what materials were uncovered, and then also we discovered that we had some. We were not prepared for the amount of structural restoration that was required. On each floor of the building, after we'd removed the walls that we weren't going to be needing anymore, we really, at that point, you could see that the floors were very uneven, and they were uneven to the point that was maybe a little alarming, even for people that are used to old buildings. And so there's a couple of spots where plaster damage allowed us to look up at some of those uneven floor areas, and we discovered that there were actually floor joists that had failed and were broken. And so that was a systemic problem in the building. It happened in the same place on each floor, and we finally figured out it had to do with just a slow water damage over lots and lots of years, and it required basically full removal and replacement of large portions of each floor. So that was an unexpected. That's an example of an unexpected hurdle that we came across during construction. And you know, something like that is why you have contingencies. But it's also the type of it also takes away from the ability to do more fun stuff in a project, because you know, once you can't unsee a broken floor joist.
Thank you for that. Questions for Andy, Roxanne, or anything covering anything we talked about so far?
Well, I'll speak up.
Well,
I'd like to hear a little bit more from Roxanne. It was good to hear the story about Edna Griffin, but I think it's also interesting to hear just a little bit more about your own connection to the building, and you know, when you first worked there, coming to own it, and your own civil rights background, just so people understand that connection to the building too.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, good. I worked there when I was 14, lied about my age, and took up smoking, which lasted for most of my life. it wasn't a very good job. It wasn't a very pleasant place to work, but they paid me money and I needed money. I'm the oldest of 6 children, and we had very tough times when I was growing up. And so I started working at 14 and never stopped. And the building came into our possession twice, and we sold it twice. The first time it came into our possession, neither of us had our offices in the building, and I don't know very much about that part of the story. My husband would know more about it than I did. But then after we sold it, the people who bought it didn't or couldn't do anything with it, and so we bought it back and held it for many years after that. And I moved into the building in 2000 on the 6th floor. James was on the 5th floor. James's offices were on the 5th floor. And my goal was always to walk up the 6 flights of stairs. You know how you're supposed to walk upstairs so you stay in shape. That was my goal. I never did do it. One thing you might not know about the building is it had a person-operated elevator. For many, 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 many years. It was operated by a man who'd been a news anchor at WHO. And he operated it until almost the day he died. And it was extremely pleasant to get in the elevator in the morning and be taken up to my office by this delightful man. I joined the NAACP when I was 14. My mother had to drive me. Same year I went to work at the Katz Drugstore. And my mom drove me to the meetings, and nobody could understand why this little white girl wanted to go to the NAACP meetings. But I knew even then that I needed to devote my time and my attention to issues of racial justice. And so that's what I did. And I'm still working in that area. Many of the cases that I've handled over the years have been cases involving racial justice. And I'm currently working on a case against a class action against Wellmark for discrimination on the basis of race. And I'm 76 and I plan on working on racial justice until the day I die.
Thank you for that. Other questions?
Joe, this is Scott. Probably Andrew, was there any thought in that one picture from prior to 1906 that looked like that corner there was a flattened portion of that with potentially a door going in there? Was there any thought or consideration of doing something like that again?
No, we didn't really do that. And there's a couple of reasons why. When they remodeled it in 1906, that they completely redid that corner, and there's no evidence that any portion of this survived that remodel. And then also the streets were quite a bit lower at that point. The streets were feet below this, so or at least it dipped down. So that was never really considered. And if I'm being completely honest, which I tend to, I didn't even know it did that for a long time. So.
Thank you. Other questions? One of the other seat questions, and you've touched on this a little bit already, for either one of the panelists, when researching the historical use of the building, are there other interesting facts that you unearthed as you were kind of looking through things, historical record? You know, Andy had those nice drawings and renderings of the building historically, so, or maybe some unexpected things that popped up as you were looking through the historical record of the building.
Well, Proudfoot and Bird was the architect that did the 1906 renovation, and they ended up putting their offices on the 6th floor. That's the firm that is now Brooks Borg Skiles. They were prominent firm at the time, and I thought it was cool that they moved into the top floor. I also learned that through working on this building that Roxanne Conlon had run for governor, because her headquarters were in the basement. And I remember like figuring it out that's what that was, and I didn't know that she had run for governor, so I was really impressed and excited to learn that. I also learned that she ran for Senate. So I learned about those things in the building. And then this is kind of a sad curiosity, but Martin Flynn, the original owner and builder of the building, actually committed suicide before the 1906 renovation was complete. And that was kind of a unhappy thing to know, but I thought all those were interesting pieces of trivia about the building that really paled in comparison as I started to figure out the impact of the Edna Griffin civil rights story. That took me a while to kind of grasp too, but as Roxanne explained, it was really like a national level event that happened. And it presaged the more commonly understood and known civil rights activities by about 6 to 8 years. And as Roxanne explained to me once, it was part of a tradition in Iowa of being progressive in terms of racial civil rights.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We've got just a few minutes left, and I want to give an opportunity for Sheila and Jennifer to thank our panelists and thank our sponsors as well. But I just wanted to say thank you. This is an extremely valuable presentation with a lot of really great insights and different historical perspectives on things about Des Moines that I'm sure not a lot of us knew about. So thank you to Roxanne, thank you to Andy, thank you for everyone for being here. And with that, I will turn it back over to Sheila and Jennifer. So thanks again for letting me do this. And yeah, we'll hopefully see you next month.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to go ahead and just take a minute to, I just want to say thank you to all of our DIG event sponsors for your continued support of our program. DIG stands for the Development Insights Group, and this presentation today, I would say, was just the epitome of insights into something that, I don't know about all of you guys, but this was really, really interesting and touching and moving. And Roxanne, especially thank you to you. If you're still here, I hope you are, but thank you for taking the time to do this. You gave me goosebumps when you started talking about like really being there, really knowing that person. And this wasn't just kind of a report of a story, this was the true story. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. Thank you to all of the speakers for taking time to do this today. It was just an honor to hear it from all of you who were so intimately involved in it. And I don't want to miss the opportunity. I just want to really say thank you to the DIG committee for their input and their collaboration. They do all of this behind the scenes every month, all through the year. And to make these programs possible, it takes a lot of effort and coordination. And Jennifer and I, speaking on behalf of Jennifer, I know we just really appreciate all of you guys so much. So I'm going to take a really quick second and name you guys. Jeff Magner, Ben Butsky, Carrie Boyens, Dan Corin, Joe Dickinson, Matt Weller, Nathan Scott, Nick Aldrich, Ryan Moffitt, Scott Meeker, Susan Judkins, and Zane Muntz. And we really are very privileged at the Downtown Chamber to have you guys and all of your support in doing this. And last but not least, kind of has become our mascot, our icon for the DIG events, Joe Benish, our Master of Ceremonies with the Ingenuity Group. Thank you for running these for us. It's nice to have you at the helm so that we can pay attention to what's going on. So thanks again to everybody, and hope you all have a really nice day and a nice week.
Thank you, everyone.